Budge!
Today we're going to be talking about change, the behavioural science of change.
We're bad because doing what we've always done is safe.
What we're seeing now is that resistance is changing, and it's changing quick.
So what you're saying then is to focus on the people who are really keen on the change and not to focus so much on those that are fighting it.
Being human is about change. Everything's change. It's adopting change.
Just cut through the noise for them. You know, what's in it for them? Why are we doing it? Why is it going to be greater? Make change familiar and easy.
Yeah, welcome everybody. This is Budge, How to Fudge Being Human. It's a podcast that Darren and I put together, which started out as a bit of fun, to be honest, between two mates. And I was just saying, we've hit 40,000 views and only about half of them are from my mum. So we're going okay on YouTube. And obviously Darren's the expert. So it's behavioral science, nudge, and bit of psychology podcast. Thanks, Alicia. Thank you to the National Employment Services Association for inviting us. Thank you to Sally Faulkner too, who also came up with the idea. And thanks to Natalie 𝗕𝗨𝗗𝗚𝗘, everyone. Natalie, many of you will know, is the CEO of 𝗕𝗨𝗗𝐼𝐶, one of Australia's finest employment services organisations, and of course, board chair of multiple other organisations. And we're going to focus on some of those sectors as well. So thank you for joining us.
Thank you. And I already feel like this is going to be a career limiting move.
Yes, it is. And of course, welcome Dr. Darren Coppin, behavioural scientist, writer, speaker, lover, and of course, the English answer to so many questions that nobody's willing to answer. How are you, sir?
I'm very good. Paul Miles, Managing Director of the Busy Group, one of Australia's largest employment, training and education organisations, and whose mother finally got to meet her idol, Tom Jones, just 9 months before you were born, coincidentally. And yeah, really excited to have a guest, Natalie, who has over 75 years experience in her sector.
Yeah.
Thank you, Darren. So today we're going to be talking about change, the behavioural science of change. We're going to be talking about the employment services sector, which you're all very familiar with. But for people who aren't, of course, in Australia, the employment services sector is outsourced in its entirety to organisations like ours, like yours. And every few years, government creates a policy. They then put that policy out to be tendered for, and then they purchase services from those of us that win the contracts. And of course, our companies, they grow, they decrease, they change, they move, people lose their jobs, people get jobs, offices open, offices close, and policies change. So operationally, we're pretty good at this stuff. But strategically, and actually, do we actually just employ the same old people is another question that we probably should ask. We're going to focus, though, beyond employment services. We're also going to be talking about the sector where everyone's really willing to accept change, and that's, of course, renewables and climate change. And we are also going to talk about motor racing as well, which, of course, are part of your remit, Nat. So before we start, we're going to bring up that question that we all asked you earlier on. We asked how well you rate your organization's ability to change. If you could just bring that up, if that's okay. So 13% of you thought you were excellent. Most of you thought you were above average, 25% average, and 13% of you below average. Nat, any surprises in those answers?
No, not really. I think I'm not the only one in this room that's got lots of experience in this industry. So it's something that we've done many, many times. And I think a lot of us have done multiple changes in not only contracts, but where we're delivering those contracts as well. Yeah. And Dr. Darren, I assume you can still hear us. Any thoughts? So you've got 13%, 63% are above average or excellent at change. You expected that?
It's because there's a human bias called illusory superiority, where we all think we're better at something than we really are. What does the research show, Paul? Didn't McKinsey do some research? Well,
that's our next question. So we could bring our next question up. That was a really good segue, Darren. You've been practicing. Can we jump on to our next question, please? So the next question, guys, according to McKinsey, what % of change management programs achieve their goals? What do you all think? How successful are change management programs? So Darren, interestingly, it's split between 10, 30 and 50. About 44% of people are saying 30%. About a third of people are saying only 10% achieve their goals, which is interesting, or it's changing rapidly. All right. So half the people actually got the answer right, Darren, which is 30% of people of change goals, of change management programs actually work. About 30% only thought 10% work. So we've already obviously got quite a negative view of the fact that change management programs actually work. And interestingly, of course, very few of us actually thought that they were often successful. So we're going to be talking about change denial, change resistance, and change success today. But first of all, we have to ask that question: are we actually really as bad at change as we think we are? And so, Nat, I suppose the changes in the employment services sector, what have you seen during your career since, primary school, being in this sector?
I think one of the challenges that our sector in the employment services has is that our change is fast and furious. Like, some of the contract transitions we've done have been 6 to 8 weeks. And in that time, we're closing down sites, but everything's new. We've got new regions, new sites, new staff, new employers, new department contacts. We've got new guidelines, new terminology, new acronyms. Everything's new, and it happens really, really quickly. I think the key to the success in our industry is that we do have to remember, we've got to identify what hasn't changed. And for us, no matter what that terminology or what that guideline says, there's 4 key things we really still need to do. And that's, we've got to get our customers in, our job seekers in quickly and engage them and commence them. We've got to get them job ready quickly. We've got to place them into work quickly, and we've got to make sure they stay there. So that doesn't change. So I believe what we do doesn't change, but how we do it does. And that's where we need to, as leaders especially, I think, cut through the noise and make sure that our people actually understand what's really important. And right now there's pressure coming from the department, there's pressure coming everywhere on providers in Workforce Australia. It's just keep that remembering to make sure that we're putting those customers first and that we're enabling our staff to understand what the most important things are. So I think our industry is good at it, but not all.
It's okay if we flip back to Darren, because we're all missing him. So I suppose what's interesting about this is the fact that, yes, we're probably very good at operational change. We quickly take offices, we quickly take on the staff that have lost their jobs, and then, our staff go to other companies, that sort of thing. We're really good at those operational changes. But I'm not so sure that we're so good at the strategic stuff whereby, one person comes from one provider to another provider and carries on doing their previous job. We've got an example, where people literally are still in the same desk as they were before they were part of Busy. So Darren, are we as bad at change as we think we are, or am I being too harsh?
No, as a species, humans are probably one of the most adaptable to change. But there's a disconnect between we have to write in tenders what we're going to do. But then when you're under so much time pressure, once you've won a contract to make it happen, then there's a cognitive limitation. And you have to revert to your norm. We're an incredible social animal, a herd animal. So we often plonk new staff, the bright new talent that we think are going to be able to deliver the new delivery model, the new product that we want to deliver. But to get up and running quickly while we're trying to do 700 other things in such a small amount of time, we plonk them next to people that have been doing the same sort of thing for the last 10 years. In some cases, there'll be a safe pair of hands. In other cases, they're people that revert to the status quo, the norm, and they'll go back to what they've always done for the last 10 years. So there's this continuous pressure of what we're trying to do, and then kind of a catch up on what we actually do once we're up and running. So there's this elastic band pulling it along behind us. And we'll discuss later in the session how to overcome that. But we're bad because doing what we've always done is safe. You're not going to lose your job necessarily by doing that. And what you write down on a piece of paper and what it's like actually sitting down in front of, in this sector's case, a job seeker, is often a little bit different.
And then that comes back to the whole innovation conversation, mate, doesn't it? The Rory Sutherland stuff, that you will never get sacked for bringing in IBM, but you'll get sacked for coming up with a fantastic idea that's not executed well.
Yeah, we're risk adverse, and we end up doing what the accountants think is safest. And also, we should be a bit risk adverse in a government funded sector because we're spending public money and we're dealing with real human beings. So you can't really do too much experimentation and trial and end up ruining someone's life. So there has to be a degree of caution and testing and piloting before you roll out big change programs. But we just don't have the time. The US military had a big cultural change program really based on resilience and positive psychology. It's the greatest cultural change they've had in the last couple of 100 years. And they were able to take their site managers, or in their case, their company commanders, and put them away for 10 days, solid training on how to do this thing differently. And then they cascade that information. And taking our site managers or regional managers or any sector's key managers away for 10 days from the coalface is a big challenge. It's expensive and risky.
You're nodding a lot, Nat. Familiar sort of things?
It is. I think a majority of us have got geographically spread teams, and that includes management teams. And the risk is...
Just ignore him.
I don't want to know. The risk is what I've always called Chinese whispers training, where one person trains the next consultant who trains the next consultant who trains the next consultant, and bad habits can then lead through. I think the other challenge we've got in our industry too is that we are encouraged to use innovation, but at the same time, we're constrained by really tight contracts. So it's hard to be innovative and make those changes we want to make when you're within the bounds of these contracts. Yeah,
absolutely. I'm going to press this button to see what happens. I'm just taking you off screen, mate. It's probably the best for all of us. We do want to then talk about other sectors as well and change resistance. According to 𝗕𝗨𝗃𝐿𝐴, what percentage of mid-level managers resist change? What does everyone think? So Darren, in terms of what percent of mid-level managers resist change, the over half of people have said 42%, 41% have said 32%. This is going to get confusing quickly. And just a few people have said that 12%. So most people tend to agree, the majority agree that it's the mid-level managers are quite averse to change. And in fact, according to the research, mid-level managers in any company is where the most resistance to change will be. Any surprises in the answers there, Nat, to what everyone's thinking?
No.
Yeah, so the answer is 42%. You got the answer right. That's where the most resistance to change is. So we wanted to talk about another sector. We're going to talk about climate change, resources, that sort of sector, because you've had some experience there and you've really faced some significant resistance to change in that sector.
Yeah, I think a good example of resistance is obviously in the coal industry. So I sit on a number of boards and committees around the hydrogen sector, and my role in that is advising around workforce development needs, both nationally and globally. And the coal industry is the perfect example of, renewable resistance. And if I use Hunter Valley as an example, just 18 months ago when I first started going up there and talking to industry, I was told in no uncertain terms, do not mention the words coal transition.
Yeah.
You'll get
Which is
locked
insane,
out.
Isn't it? It's absolutely crazy, yeah.
And they had, I've been getting told, they've got export contracts until 2040. So it doesn't matter what Australia does with their renewables, it's at the end of the day, they've got their contracts. They don't want to talk to you about workforce transition into another industry. So that was just 12, 18 months ago. What we're seeing now is that resistance is changing, and it's changing quick, and a lot of that, I believe, is external factors. So we've got a new government now, we've got new climate targets. The rest of the world is getting on with it and really leading the charge here. So there's a lot of pressure now for us to, if you can't beat them, join them type thing. And we're now looking, what can we do to be world leaders in this change? And the Hunter Valley is now a perfect example of that. Out of all the regions that have got like hydrogen and renewable hubs, these guys have got the most collaboration, coordination. The entire industry and communities are working together to work out how can we be best placed to be the leaders in Australia. I think probably our biggest challenge now, the resistance is the communities, because you've got communities that don't quite understand what this means for them. Their entire community works in that sector, where they're delivery drivers, security guards, the sandwich lady, or whatever, so we've now got a resistance from communities to really embrace this change. So it's not just middle managers, it can be entire industries.
Yeah. And so could we just bring Darren back up if that's okay? You can see if he's got a new hat yet. And it's funny, being from South Wales, I'm from Cardiff in South Wales, which of course was once sort of the resources centre of the world. When you leave the capital city, my hometown of Cardiff, you go out, half an hour and there's areas which were mining towns, which are literally just ghettos, basically, and you can't sell your house. And that transition by Thatcher was done so poorly. And it's always been, obviously, it was happening to us someday, but we just haven't prepared for it. And it was interesting last week. It was great to see how quickly the Queensland government are actually trying to position themselves as leaders in the world for this. And they've come up with this fund to support people transition in that space. But whether the rest of the world can do that as well, and how successful that is of course waiting to be seen. But I'm so happy and surprised at how quickly the change has come.
Yeah.
Because climate change is real. I've said it. Wow. Darren, mate, what can we do about this? The local community side of things. How do we not replicate what happened in my home city, area, and how can we help people in those regional areas of Australia, but more broadly in all sectors, actually stop resisting change?
That's a good question, and particularly pertinent to you, Paul, because obviously you're from Cardiff, you resist change, and your favourite pair of underpants was purple. And I've always felt very bad that I've lost those at Old Parliament House for you. But Matt Little and I went and spent 2 days searching the rubble there after the fire, and we actually found them. So we've got the purple underpants back. So it's a serious thing that you can now focus on running busy without worrying.
Thank you, Darren. If anyone wants to have a drink tonight and hear that story, I'm happy to share, because that probably makes no sense to anyone in this room.
Anyway, so
Change resistance, mate. What do we do to help people overcome it? I'm moving you on quickly to my underpants.
Yes, look, there's an issue where, and I had a friend running a huge brewery. In fact, it was the biggest brewery in the world in Brazil, called Brahma, and it merged with Interbrew in Europe and the American Anheuser-Busch. And they were having change issues, all of the different cultures.
This is the story, isn't it, around where the actual beer being called Brahma caused massive offence, right? Because of the Hindu gods.
Not necessarily.
We've read different stuff. Keep going.
No, but the problem they had was they brought in consultants to try and affect change better, as you do. And they're spending 7 figures on the big 4 consultants. And what the consultants did was they listened to the people resisting change to try and address the problems, the issues, the failings, why people were resisting it. Now, in any change, you have this bell curve of 20% of people are up for it. 60% of people don't really care, they're ambiguous, and then 20% of people will resist it no matter what. It's just human nature, a natural bell curve. And what we do is we focus on that 20% of people that are resisting, and we kind of amplify their objections. And we focus on that, we spend money on that, we address it. But what we're doing is we're making the noise that the 60% of people that really don't care about the change, they'll just get on with it, they move towards whatever's making the loudest noise. So then you end up with 80% of people resisting the change. And they spent millions on this, and in desperation and having run out of budgets, they just got rid of the consultants and they started focusing on why is it working, or why are those 20% of people supporting the change, making it work? And they promoted those stories. And then the 60% of ambiguous people followed that. And then out of that 20% of people resisting change, 10% thought, hello, I'm being a bit isolated here. And they kind of went with it. And then 10%, there was natural attrition. So you end up with a successful change program by focusing on what works quickly and promoting good news stories, and not doing what consultants tend to do and amplify the negative stories.
Yeah. So just to clarify, because this is where I read some of this before, and so I'm trying to understand it. So what you're saying then is to focus on the people who are really keen on the change, and not to focus so much on those that are fighting it, which does sound counterintuitive.
Yes, and it's quick wins. It's called the heliotropic effect as well, where something's positive, people gravitate towards it, and it's a strengths-based approach, but it's also a lot cheaper and a lot more successful.
Which is good for employment services. Mate, I'm just going to turn you off again because I want to talk about change denial. You might have seen this question already. According to Forbes, what % of CEOs are sacked for poor change management? Has anyone in this room been sacked for poor change management? So 11% is jumping into a lead there, Darren. What % of CEOs are sacked for poor change management? We've got a lot of people, 60% are saying only 11%. Interestingly, it's 31% of CEOs have actually been sacked for poor change management. So be warned, it's there. We can't change your mind now. There we go. Well done, you got it right. Any surprises in what people answered? They thought that it was quite a low percent got sacked. And interesting, I think Australia has one of the highest turnover rates of CEOs in the world. We get sacked a lot more easily than other countries.
Right.
Yeah. Any surprises in those numbers?
A little bit. I guess there's two questions. There's change management, but there's also leading change as well too, and instigating it. So if that's in regards to change management, I probably would have picked A. But I think if the question was asked then around leadership and actually instigating change, it'd be a completely different answer again.
Yeah. So we want to talk about change denial. The other area that you're heavily involved with that I didn't realize is motor racing. And you even own a V8 or two.
Yeah, a couple, yeah.
Okay, but we can't talk about the technicalities of it, right? So what's your involvement then in motor racing, and how does that relate to change? Because obviously motor racing, like the whole climate change, is probably facing a very, very different future.
Yeah, I think, and the motor racing industry is a good example of denial. So we all know climate change is real. There's scientific evidence there for it. And even those of us in the motorsports industry, we know, but there's that denial there of it's coming. So I'm a director of the Australian Racing Drivers Club, and we manage Sydney Motorsports Park, which is Australia's premier racetrack out in Western Sydney here. And we get nearly 500,000 people come through the gates there every year. And as a director on that board, we know it's inevitable that in 5 or 10 or 20 years' time, there's going to be no petrol combustion engines out on that track. It's coming. We've got a lot of members and drivers and competitors that are either resistant or still denying that change is happening. And this is a perfect example where I'm resisting and denying change personally. Because, as you mentioned, I still race a V8 race car. I still drive a V8 on the road as well too. I love my petrol guzzling car. Yet here I am sitting in the boardroom with a hat on where I'm trying to lead and instigate this significant change into an entire sector. And I mean, at Australian Racing Drivers Club, we're actually wanting to be leaders in this space. And there's a thing called the Sustainability Circuits Index. And this is a rating where all the circuits around the world are actually ranked against each other for sustainability. And we're currently 36 out of 96 circuits internationally. We're the highest in Australia, but we want to be one of the highest in the world. So we're literally, like, a strategy of ours is to become a sustainable racetrack. And we're bringing in new and exciting technologies, like we're doing partnerships in hydrogen now. We're one of the other boards I sit on, we're actually building Australia's first hydrogen race car at the moment.
Oh, wow.
And for anyone who's seen the movie Ford versus Ferrari, the message of that movie very much was Ford was using motorsports to promote their vehicles. We can use motorsports to promote renewables.
Yeah, absolutely.
So we've got a really important role here to play. Our challenge now is to bring tens of thousands of motorsport tragics along that journey with us and get them to change as well. Yeah,
that's going to be a huge challenge. Really.
Huge challenge.
Yeah. We're going to bring Darren back up. It's nice not having him there, but Darren, Darren, this notion then that we could see change coming, but we know it's happening, but we don't want to accept it and deny it, mate. What we're talking here about motor racing is that's kind of normal human behavior.
Well, you're laughing because it's very serious, Paul. Look, there are two key points here. One, that humans are good at hope. So any little light at the end of the tunnel, any glimmer of hope, and we prefer to gravitate towards that than have to affect huge changes. Hang on. That's better.
Couldn't balance it any longer.
I know, getting neck ache. But also, what there is, when people deny things, when there's big change, there's a fear of loss of control, there's uncertainty, you worry that you're not competent to handle it, especially when decisions are sudden or arbitrary or dictatorial. And people go through a very similar cycle to the grief cycle. Where I guess you deny it, then you're angry, you bargain, you're depressed. And if you've got a load of staff going through that cycle, it takes a very brave and courageous manager to ride it and to expect it and say, well, they're naturally going to go through this, because you basically put your hands on your head and say, I can't handle this as a manager. But people have to go through those cycles generally before they get to acceptance and then making the best of it. And we're like that as a species. We're like that as a community and a population. And often it's only dramatic change happens when the gun's to our head. You know, the pandemic's an amazing example. If you were to say to people, right, go home and lock yourself away for a month, they're going to say, get lost. But when there's a massive pressure, particularly with climate change, might eventually get round to it. But it's usually only when it's really impacting you personally that humans really kick into action, because they're still always clinging on to that glimmer of hope that the data's wrong, the research is wrong, and we can still just use petrol at the pump. And the floods, you know, are affecting someone else, or the bushfires are affecting someone else.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it, on that COVID point, that the behavioural insights team in New South Wales is now coming under scrutiny for some of their nudges. Did you see that?
I saw a link that you sent me, but not being a CEO, I hadn't paid to subscribe, so I couldn't actually read it. But I'm going to pretend I know all about it.
Oh, good.
No, yeah, you're completely right. And people are suspicious of nudging because they think it's manipulative. Whereas what we've been looking at throughout our whole podcast, Paul, is that I guess governments are doing it to move people and leave them with choice, but move people or encourage them gently towards what's better for them, what's for the greater good and the good of the individual. And I know a lot of the nudge unit people, and there's nothing they would do that's unethical. There's strong ethics at the core of this on what's best for people. But of course, we're always going to be suspicious. You know, it's that negativity bias we have. So we crave this glimmer of hope, but we have this negativity bias that gives us conspiracy theories and worry about the worst case scenario.
And there's literally a whole massive work, isn't it, on that ethical side of nudge theory. So see what comes out in the media in the next few weeks around this. We want to end by talking about change success, what actually works, what we've seen working. We might just have one more question then. What do we think is the major number one obstacle to successful change? So the choice is, Darren: poor communication, change fatigue, lack of capability to sustain change, lack of input from all levels of employees. So straight away, the one that I put as well was pure communication. Lots of people have gone for poor communication. Interestingly, and I'll have to dig out, I haven't put the reference out, I'm going to have to dig out the reference. Interestingly, it was change fatigue, and which I think is fascinating for our sector, because this brings us really nicely back to employment services, a sector that undergoes so much change every few years, and of course, with multiple contracts going through change. Change fatigue is the number one. Interestingly, number two is lack of capability to sustain change, and then followed by the last one, which is lack of input from all levels of employees. Anything in those numbers that shocks you?
I am actually surprised, especially this room didn't pick fatigue. Yeah. Because it's just, I think it has been fatiguing for us all. It's constantly changing. So I think, yeah, that one surprises me, and that would have been what I would have picked. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, so you have been in the employment services sector for years, and since, of course, we said primary school. You would have seen so much change, but you would have seen so much successful change. How have you gone about going from that, mailroom to boardroom story? How have you gone about learning and developing and change, and how do you now deliver successful change in your organization? Yeah, and I think the answer is 27 years in the industry. Yep. So I've actually been in the industry since before employment services were privatised. So that was probably the biggest change that we saw, the reform to privatised employment services. So yeah, I started in the industry literally as a receptionist in the first, in the job network days. And I had... Broadbeach? Yes, Surfers Paradise, I was, yeah. So I worked as an employment consultant after being a receptionist, but I did have quite a fast transition in my career. And, I was a GM by 28. By 31, I was an executive general manager, and I had about 700 staff, a budget of 70 million, and about 130 sites, I think it was.
Wow.
And then in my 30s, I was appointed onto boards and into CEO role. So I've had to myself change how I work really, really quickly. You know, I've gone from doing things to managing things to leading things. And so having to constantly change.
And everyone in this room who's led a company in those GM CEO roles will know how difficult that is, that transition from doing to leading.
Yeah, and letting go, because, I mean, you normally get promoted because you're good at something. And then suddenly you're not doing that thing that you're really good at, and you're trying to inspire and lead and enable other people to be good at it. So I think the success in my career with that change is I actually do like change. I embrace change. And as a frontliner, you know, when change happened, I was quite happy to embrace it and do it. As a manager, I was happy to implement it. And now as a C-suite or a director, I have to instigate it. And I love that as well too. So I think for me in the last 27 years, I would put it down to there's two different types of staff that I've seen in this sector, well, any business really, and it's those that put their hand up and there's those that put their hand out. And those people that put their hand up, I think, are those influencers we were talking about before, that they like change, they embrace it, they lead it, they encourage it. But we've got to remember, not everybody's good at it and not everybody likes it. And maybe it's not the right sector to work in if you don't like change, but you know what, some of the greatest people, they don't have to be good at change to be good at our sector. So I think as leaders, it's just really important that we understand that not everybody's great at it and just cut through the noise for them. You know, what's in it for them? Why are we doing it? Why is it going to be greater? And just making sure that we're communicating it better. So I would put that down to the success of it is helping others. Absolutely.
And I kind of fear putting Darren back on screen, but let's do it anyway.
Oh, I've got the undies.
Yes. Darren, we're talking about change success. Mate, how can we help through behavioral science organizations to be better at change?
I think we've covered a lot of the subjects. The biggest return on investment from change management is in that sandwich in the organizational group, which is the middle managers, and spending the time on those. I've done a number of big projects for education departments, and the personality and the ability to handle stress and the resilience of, say, a TAFE leader or a headmaster, headmistress at school cascades throughout the rest of the school. If you focus on those people and you enable them to be able to handle change effectively, then the rest will follow through. Then there's that heliotropic effect, that strengths focus, focusing on and creating a gravity around early successes and promoting those massively. One of the things we've kind of missed out on and lost a lot in the last couple of decades is collegiate support, peer support, having friends at work. We've seen for a number of studies and data analysis that we've done for work cover groups that if you say you've got a friend at work, you're more able to handle change, you're much faster at getting back to work after injury, generally a psychological injury, and you're much more productive. So it's how you encourage that getting together. Now, things like these conferences are great for everybody getting together. But, and I know a lot of firms just up front of the Workforce Australia launch have had great conferences for their teams and for their leaders. But that's important to maintain that. Now, the Friday after work drink isn't necessarily appropriate or facilitated anymore, but things like that are so important for being able to force through change and informally being able to address issues people have and concerns and worries and fears over a beer or over a table or over a coffee, because generally we have much less money and time available to spend focus on those things. And one of the biggest issues we've found in a number of research that I've been involved in is that people haven't had a chance to have a chat with a manager. They might have an annual review, which is an hour. They get 37 things they're doing well and one that they can improve. And they just focus on that one and feel bullied and pressured by that if it's not delivered in the right way. So look, that's the key. And I don't think we've got a problem with change, because change is, being human is about change. Everything's change. It's adopting change and getting in the habit of change and maintaining that is the issue I've seen in the employment services sector and a number of much larger organisations in other sectors. Is yes, we can say we're going to do it, we launch it well, and then we revert to norm. So it's pushing through and getting in the habit of habits.
Thank you, sir. That's. I hope everyone's enjoyed that and found that helpful. We try to cover that resistance, denial, and what can actually action change. I'm going to sum up in a minute. But Darren, any final thoughts or words from yourself?
I mean, the only other thing that seems to have worked is counterintuitive. And most organizations have a matriarch or a patriarch that's been in the organization for years, and they're cynical about change. But when you harness that cynic and say, look, I want you to teach this new methodology, this change, this new delivery model to the new staff, then there's something called the Pygmalion effect kicks in, and that cynic becomes your greatest advocate. And they don't even believe in it to start off with, but because they're training someone else up in it, unless they're a complete terrorist within the organization, they fake it until they make it, and they actually adopt that change, and they become your greatest advocate. So there's a technique called harness the cynic, which seems counterintuitive, but get the person that's sort of a bit resistant to lead the change, and they become great leaders of change. It was very surprising.
Thank you, mate. I hope you enjoyed Catherine. Where are you next? Where are you going?
I'm going up to Pines Creek, but we're going to swim in a spring later.
Okay. Apparently, it's all quite safe up there to swim, so go for it. Nat, thank you so much for doing this with us today. We really do appreciate it. Thanks for sharing so much about your career. Any final thoughts for us on how you've really made, how as companies we should be adapting to change in this whole new world? And also, I guess, a sector as well is going under significant review where more changes may come. In your experience, how do we best prepare ourselves for that?
I think make it familiar and make it easy. And that's a bit about that, the hand-holding and the guiding and focusing on what's important and prioritizing and stuff. But, if I use the motorsports as another example, when I say make it familiar, we need to start promoting electric vehicles and hydrogen race cars and things like that. So make it familiar, make the invisible visible, and then make it easy. And that's why we're investing in the infrastructure and that, so that when people do want to convert, they can. And it's really simple. So I think, that would be my parting words, is make change familiar and easy.
Yeah, thanks for that. And thank you, Darren. Look, we did a summary for this, which is basically in terms of change. We do all have a survival instinct. Change challenges our negatively biased and challenges to defaults and the status quo. So, we are instinctively always go for that negative bias and what's been normalized. We don't always consult or prepare psychologically for the change, and that's something we need to get better at as well. We don't necessarily train, prepare, or invest for that change. And again, if we look at our sector, we do the operational stuff really well. And there's obviously a very key point here around training that middle management area for that change. And of course, the habitualizing, we will all have examples throughout our careers where we had to change a process, where we made it a habit. It became so much easier to adopt. So I hope everyone's enjoyed us. Thank you for joining us today. Thank you, Darren, again. Thank you, Nat. This will be up on YouTube in the next few weeks. We'll also be on Spotify and Apple. So throw us a like, a comment, a share. It's really appreciated. Thank you, everyone. I hope you've enjoyed today's session. Cheers.